Vikings, let's win this game.
Vikings fan, a major signing just shook the entire offense in Minnesota, but that is only the beginning of the story. There is also a defensive addition that is surprising people in a way nobody expected. At the same time, there is still a hole on the roster that is seriously worrying people who follow this team closely. And here is the twist. At the end of this sequence, a shocking statement from a key player about why he left the team. Let's get started. Look, there has been a recent move by the Vikings that completely changes how people look at this offense. And that is not an exaggeration. When a team changes the most important position on the field, the entire machine feels it. Wide receivers run routes differently. Running backs suddenly find more space. Even the offensive line plays with a different level of confidence. And that is exactly what happened over the past few days. The arrival of a new quarterback has become the main topic of conversation in Minnesota, not just because of the signing itself, but because of the domino effect it creates across the roster. When an experienced player arrives to lead the offense, everyone catching passes starts imagining a big season ahead. And that matters because one move at quarterback can raise the ceiling for the entire offense. Now here is the moment everyone has been waiting for. We can finally say the name. Kyler Murray has joined the Vikings on a one-year contract. And look, this changes a lot within this offense. This is not just any player. Murray has already been selected to the Pro Bowl 2 times. He has a strong arm. He can make almost every throw on the field. And when a play breaks down, he becomes a nightmare for defenses because he extends the play by running. He escapes the pocket and finds receivers open during improvisation. That is exactly the kind of chaos defenses hate. The player who might be smiling the most right now is Justin Jefferson. The last season for the main weapon in the Vikings offense was strange. It was not a disaster, but it fell well below the extremely high standard he set earlier in his career. Jefferson still surpassed 1,000 receiving yards, but his average production dropped significantly compared to his first seasons in the league. And that naturally leads to an important question. What really held the offense back last year? A lot of it came from a lack of rhythm within the offense. Late passes, throws off target, plays dying before they could develop. Anyone who follows this team saw that happen multiple times. And when that keeps happening, an elite receiver can only do so much. With Kyler Murray, the situation could look very different. He has the mobility to hold the ball longer. That gives Jefferson more time to work deeper routes. And when Jefferson gains even half a step of separation, it is over. No defense can stop that. And he is not the only one who could benefit. Jordan Addison could also see more opportunities on deep routes. Murray has always liked attacking downfield. Back in Arizona, he helped DeAndre Hopkins produce a massive season. Now imagine that kind of connection with the level of talent Jefferson brings. TJ Hawkinson could benefit as well. Murray has always worked well with tight ends. It worked with Trey McBride. It worked with Zach Ertz. So the entire offense gains a new dimension. Even the running game could breathe easier. When a quarterback threatens to run, defenses have to respect it. That opens running lanes. And then Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason can find space that simply did not exist before. That is how one quarterback move can change everything around him. But this is where the story begins to shift. Not everyone came out happy from this situation. While some players see this signing as a huge opportunity, others may have just seen their future become much more complicated. And that is where the next part of this story begins. Because inside the Vikings locker room, there is a player who might have been the one most affected by this entire situation. A young name, a player who hoped to take control of the team. But now, his path just became a lot more difficult. And that could have real consequences for the future of the quarterback room. And I want to hear your opinion about this too. Tell me in the comments. Do you think this signing completely transforms the Vikings offense, or does the team still need more pieces? Because the next part of this story involves exactly who may have lost the most ground on the roster after this move. And look, this situation could completely change the future of a player in Minnesota. Not every roster move arrives with noise. Some pass almost unnoticed. No massive headline. No fan debate all day long. But sometimes it is exactly this type of quiet signing that ends up changing an entire unit on the team. And that is exactly what happened with the Vikings. While many people were focused on the arrival of the new quarterback and discussing the offense, the front office made a very specific move on defense. A signing designed for the system. A player who fits perfectly into the aggressive style this defense likes to play. First, the news came out. Then the numbers started appearing. And suddenly people began thinking, wait a second, this might actually be better than it first looked. That reaction matters because underrated moves like this often become huge by the middle of the season. The name of this addition is James Pierre. He arrived in Minnesota on a 2-year contract after spending several seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is not the kind of name that dominates sports talk shows, but around the league there is real respect for him. And that comes from one simple reason: consistency. Pierre is a tall cornerback, standing around 6 feet 2 inches. He can play man coverage, he can play zone, and most importantly, he is disciplined. That is extremely important in the defensive system the Vikings run. This defense loves to pressure quarterbacks. It loves to confuse them. It sends blitzes from all directions. The challenge, however, is what happens behind that pressure. For the system to work, the cornerbacks must hold up in coverage. If one of them fails, the play quickly turns into a touchdown. That is why this signing matters more than it might seem at first. In Pittsburgh, Pierre showed he can handle that responsibility. Last season, he had one of the best performances of his career. His coverage numbers caught attention. When quarterbacks threw in his direction, the completion rate was low. And when the ball arrived, he was often right there to contest it. There were interceptions, there were passes defended, there were plays that ended opposing drives. It was not a massive season in terms of total snaps, but the efficiency was there. And efficiency like that can earn a much bigger role in a defense like this. And that is exactly the type of player the Vikings coaching staff likes to bring in. Players who might not be superstars but understand their role within the system. There is another detail that makes this even more interesting. The Vikings' new defensive backs coach, Gerald Alexander, has worked with James Pierre before. That means familiarity. That means trust. And when a coach knows a player well, the adjustment usually happens much faster. Head coach Kevin O'Connell also commented on this recently. He explained that both the scouting department and the coaching staff identified Pierre as someone who could help the team immediately. And there is more. The Vikings secondary already has interesting names. Byron Murphy Jr. has been an important piece. Isaiah Rodgers also arrives to compete for snaps, so adding Pierre creates something every defense needs: real competition. When 3 or 4 players fight for playing time, the level rises, and that usually shows up when the season gets tougher. Of course, no signing arrives without questions. Pierre has never been a full season locked-in starter. He has alternated between defensive snaps and special teams roles. So the big question now is simple. Can he turn that efficiency into consistent production with more playing time? If he can, the Vikings may have found incredible value on the market. And look, these quiet signings often become important when a team starts gaining momentum during the season. But while the defense adjusts with these new pieces, there is another topic still surrounding the roster. A specific position on offense that still does not have a clear answer, and that could become a serious problem if it is not solved soon, because there is a hole on the Vikings roster that remains open, and many fans who live and breathe Vikings football have already started worrying about it. Now let me talk about something that is still keeping a lot of people who follow this team up at night, because while some pieces arrived, other positions still do not have clear answers. And when that happens in the NFL, sooner or later it becomes a problem on the field, especially when we are talking about the center of the offensive line. The truth is, the Vikings made several interesting moves this offseason. There were important signings, some veteran departures, and internal development bets. But there is one specific role on offense that still does not have a definitive owner, and that stands out. Anyone who understands football knows that the center position is delicate. That is where every play begins. It is the player who snaps the ball to the quarterback, the one who organizes blocking assignments, the one who has to recognize defensive blitzes. When that point fails, the entire offense suffers, and that is exactly what started worrying a portion of the fan base. That is why this is not just a technical issue. It can shape the entire season. The reason has a name. Ryan Kelly recently decided to retire from football, and his departure left a space that nobody has fully claimed yet. Kelly did not play the entire previous season. Injuries limited his time on the field. Even so, whenever he was available, he showed exactly why he was respected around the league. Strong quarterback protection, excellent defensive recognition, and most importantly, efficiency in run blocking. Without him, the Vikings need to find a new solution, and if they do not find one, pressure right up the middle could become a weekly problem. 2 names immediately appear in that conversation. The first is Blake Brandel. He already had opportunities to play at that position in several games last season. At times he performed well, at other times not so much. There were games when the protection in the middle of the line was exposed. Pressure came straight through the interior, and when that happens, the quarterback has almost nowhere to escape. Even so, Brandel remains a real option on the roster. Another name entering this conversation is Michael Juergens. He also received snaps at center recently. It was not a huge sample of games, but there were some observations. At times, he showed good mobility in run blocking. At other moments, he struggled with interior pressure. In other words, neither player fully secured the position. And that leads to the question many fans who live and breathe Vikings football have already started asking. Will the Vikings trust these internal options, or could the team still search for an external solution? That question matters because this is one of the few weak spots left on the offense. During free agency, several available centers have already signed with new teams. Some interesting names found contracts quickly. Minnesota chose not to enter that race. That suggests the front office prefers patience for now. The idea seems simple: avoid desperate decisions. Head coach Kevin O'Connell recently explained that the priority right now is stacking good decisions. The season is still far away. The team does not need to solve everything in March. But at the same time, there is a reality. If the offensive line fails through the middle, the entire offensive plan becomes vulnerable. It does not matter if the quarterback can run. It does not matter if the receivers are elite. Interior pressure destroys any offense. So this competition between Brandel and Jurgens could become one of the most important battles of training camp. And this is exactly why it matters so much. If neither player fully convinces the staff, there is another path: the NFL draft. The Vikings could select a young center and develop him gradually. That has happened many times across the league. Many current starters began exactly that way. First fighting for playing time, then eventually taking over the position. But while this offensive line puzzle remains unresolved, another story inside the roster has started attracting even more attention, because the arrival of a new quarterback has completely changed the situation for a young player who dreamed of leading this team. And the conversation that happened inside the Vikings facility over the past few days says a lot about what might happen next. When a team decides to bring in a quarterback with experience, the conversation inside the locker room changes immediately. There is no way around it. Quarterback is the position that defines the rhythm of a franchise. It receives the most media attention. It carries the weight of victories and defeats. And that is exactly what happened in Minnesota over the past few days. The arrival of a new name to command the offense did not go unnoticed. On the contrary, it became the center of discussions inside the Vikings facility. Coaches discussing adjustments to the system, players trying to understand how the offensive dynamics might change. And finally, the news took its full shape. The quarterback who arrived was Kyler Murray, the former #1 overall pick in the draft, a two-time Pro Bowl selection, a player who, when healthy, can completely change how defenses prepare to face an offense. Head coach Kevin O'Connell did not hide his excitement when discussing the signing. He explained that he has followed Murray since the draft evaluation process years ago. He always saw talent in the quarterback, a strong arm, improvisational ability, and that mobility that very few players at the position possess in the league. At the same time, there is an important strategic shift to consider. The Vikings offense in recent seasons has operated with more traditional pocket quarterbacks, players who prefer to stay within the structure of the play, read progressions, deliver the ball quickly. Murray brings a different characteristic. He can execute plays inside the structure but also becomes dangerous when everything breaks down. If the defense pressures him, he escapes. If the field opens, he runs. And when the play extends, receivers eventually find open space. That could force the coaching staff to adjust parts of the playbook. It does not mean changing everything, but it might mean incorporating concepts that better take advantage of that mobility. And if they get that balance right, this offense could become much harder to defend. O'Connell himself explained that a coach's job is to find ways to maximize what his players do best rather than trying to transform them into something they are not. Murray has enough history in the NFL to prove what he can do. In more than 80 career starts, he has accumulated more than 20,000 passing yards. He has also surpassed 3,000 rushing yards. In total, he has been responsible for more than 150 touchdowns. When he finds rhythm, he becomes a nightmare for defenses, because while everyone focuses on double covering Justin Jefferson, Murray can simply pull the ball and run, or escape the pocket and find a receiver after coverage breaks down. That is the kind of pressure that changes how defenses call an entire game. But this is where the internal tension begins to grow. Every signing of this magnitude creates a natural consequence. When an experienced quarterback arrives, someone on the roster inevitably loses ground. And that is where the most delicate part of this story begins. Because inside the same quarterback room, there is a young player who expected to take control of the franchise, a talent still developing, an athlete who showed flashes but also struggled during his first experience in the NFL. That player is J.J. McCarthy. O'Connell made it clear that the team has not given up on the young quarterback. He is only 23 years old. He has limited professional experience, and the coaching staff believes he can still improve a great deal. But at the same time, Murray's arrival changes the competitive landscape. In practice, the battle for the starting job now appears heavily tilted toward the veteran. McCarthy can keep developing. He can learn. He can treat this season as a developmental year. But the reality of the NFL is harsh. If Murray plays well, the franchise will likely want to keep him longer, and that naturally leads to another question circulating among Vikings fans across the country. What will McCarthy's true future look like within this franchise? That is not a small question. It could shape the next few years for Minnesota, because the next story in this sequence involves a recent departure from the roster, a player who chose a different path in the league and explained exactly why he made that decision. And his answer may surprise a lot of people. Some player departures happen and almost nobody notices. Others leave a strange feeling behind, not because the player was a superstar, but because he was part of the machine. He appeared in key moments. He grew inside the locker room, and suddenly he decides to move on. That is exactly what happened with a wide receiver who spent several years in Minnesota. During this free agency period, he decided to take a chance on a new stage in his career, a new team, a new role within the offense, and most importantly, a chance at greater impact. The player in question is Jalen Nailor. After 4 seasons wearing purple and gold, Nailor signed with the Las Vegas Raiders. The contract runs for 3 years and represents a meaningful opportunity for a player who for a long time held the role of the third receiver in the Vikings passing attack. When he publicly explained his decision, it became clear what influenced him most. Nailor said the offensive project with the new team caught his attention immediately, especially the work of head coach Clint Kubiak and the offensive staff. According to him, the coaching group brings a lot of experience and a vision that could help him grow as a player. But there is another layer behind that decision. In Minnesota, Nailor shared the field with 2 extremely talented receivers, Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. When you play alongside 2 players at that level, your role naturally becomes limited. Many routes are designed for the primary target, others go to the second option, and the third receiver appears in more specific situations. That is often the reality for a player trying to carve out a bigger place in the offense. Even so, Nailor managed to contribute during his time with the Vikings. During his time in Minnesota, he recorded 69 receptions, more than 1,000 receiving yards, and 11 touchdowns in official games. Those are not massive numbers, but they show he was a useful piece in the offensive rotation. Now the situation changes. With the Raiders, he hopes to take on a larger role within the offense, possibly as a second receiver, possibly as one of the leaders of the wide receiver group, something that likely would not have happened if he had remained in Minnesota. Even while leaving, Nailor spoke with respect about his time with the Vikings. He talked about how much he learned watching Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison work every day. The route techniques, the ability after the catch, the way they study the game. According to Nailor, many of those techniques are things he plans to continue using as he moves forward in his career. In other words, the departure did not come from internal problems. It came from opportunity, and that makes this exit feel more meaningful than a routine roster move. And while he begins this new chapter away from Minnesota, the Vikings offense enters a moment of redefinition as well, because his departure opens opportunities for other players on the roster. One name who could receive more snaps now is Ty Felton. The young receiver was selected in the draft recently and is still developing. He played limited snaps last season, but there is internal expectation for growth. If he takes advantage of this opportunity, he could become an important piece in the offensive rotation. And interestingly, some analysts outside the organization believe the Vikings can remain competitive even with these changes. Some NFL analysts have suggested that with the new quarterback on the roster and the offensive talent already in place, Minnesota could still fight for a playoff spot. Of course, all of that depends on how these new pieces fit together, and that leads to a bigger reflection about the current moment for this franchise. Because when you look at all these stories together, it becomes clear that the Vikings are entering a very interesting phase. Look, when you put everything that happened over the past few days together, it feels like the Vikings are entering a very interesting transition period. There was a signing that could transform the offense. There was a quiet defensive addition. There is an open competition along the offensive line. There is a new quarterback shaking up the depth chart. And there was a player leaving in search of a bigger opportunity. None of that happens by accident. These moves show the team is trying to adjust pieces in order to compete again. It is not a total rebuild, but it is not simple continuity either. It is that moment when small decisions can change the direction of a season. And that is exactly why this stretch matters so much for Minnesota. And now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. This space belongs to everyone who lives and breathes Vikings football. Which of these stories affects the future of the team the most? The arrival of the new quarterback? The departure of the receiver? Or the remaining hole along the offensive line? See you in the next video. Stay tuned. SKOL Vikings, let's go.